Here we go again. Hello, my fam. It is Perez, the queen of all media, the original influencer, and your number one source for everything It Ends With Us saga. Remember last month after Team Justin Baldoni withdrew their subpoenas against Taylor Swift and her law firm? Exclusive Baldoni sources said the reason for that is because they got everything they needed. Well, that's turned out to not be true. Minutes ago, lawyers for the garden variety actress filed a letter for the court requesting a protective order and revealing a lot. The high-paid attorneys tell her new bestie, Judge Lyman, quote, Blake Lively respectfully submits this letter motion for a protective order regarding the Wayfarer party's continuing demands for Miss Lively's communications with Taylor Swift, parentheses, made again yesterday, which have pursued at the same time they have refused to produce to Miss Lively the documents they publicly claimed to have received as part of a deal to withdraw their subpoenas to Miss Swift and her counsel. So if they did receive anything from Team Taylor, they want it. And they haven't gotten it. And they haven't gotten anything from Team Taylor. In an attachment to this request for a protective order, there was an exhibit from Taylor's lawyer, J. Douglas Baldridge. In this email, he confirms to lawyers CC'd, quote, Counsel, please be advised that the Venable subpoena and the Taylor Swift subpoena have been withdrawn by counsel for the Wayfarer parties without prejudice to them timely serving subpoenas in the future should they decide to do so, parentheses, all parties reserving rights. No documents are being produced and no deposition is being scheduled. Accordingly, we will be notifying the court that our motion to quash is moot. Thank you, Doug. So, one key point there, the subpoenas were withdrawn without prejudice. Translation, they can subpoena Taylor Swift again in this whole mess. So, here we are today, just moments ago, lawyers for Blake Ruin Your Livelihood submitted this request for a protective order regarding the Wayfarer party's continuing demands for Miss Lively's communications with Taylor Swift, because they got nothing, and they argue, quote, good cause exists for this request because it has been the Wayfarer party's tactic since August 2024 to make Miss Swift and her fan base central to the media strategy against Miss Lively, which they documented in both their communications and scenario planning document. That's true. That is true. Both of those things are true. But, they argue, Miss Swift is not central to Miss Lively's claims. Unlike dozens of other witnesses she identified who the Wayfarer parties have largely ignored and is otherwise irrelevant to the Wayfarer party's claims, which were dismissed on June 9th. Pause. But they will be refiling, and a second amended complaint is coming. Today's motion for protective order continues. The Wayfarer parties should not be permitted to withhold documents from Miss Lively while demanding her communications with Miss Swift. Because of this, and because their continued focus on Miss Swift is a media strategy, not a litigation strategy, Miss Lively respectfully requests that she be relieved from producing documents responsive to requests numbered 108, 109 in the request for production served by the Wayfarer parties on February 21st, 2025, seeking all documents and communications relating to and or reflecting Miss Lively's communications with Taylor Swift relating to the film or the action. Now hold on there. This is wonderful lawyering. Betty Poop herself repeatedly said publicly, it is documented in video, watching her claim on numerous occasions how involved Taylor Swift was in every aspect of It Ends With Us. Not just licensing a film, but she was there, according to her former bestie, every step of the way. And even if Team Baldoni are exploiting Taylor Swift for media attention, which they are, that doesn't negate the fact that, in her own words, Taylor Swift is involved in this. So even though the subpoena against Taylor has been withdrawn, they're still trying to get information that is Taylor related from her. And she's not happy about it because Hippocrates Lively claims that Taylor has no involvement in all of this, even though she previously said she had. Today's motion for protective order continues, saying, quote, throughout litigation and particularly over the past month, the Wayfarer parties have repeatedly used Miss Swift's name as part of their media strategy. Specifically, after serving the requests for production, and as this court is aware, the Wayfarer parties served a subpoena pursuant to Rule 45 on the law firm Venable LLP, which has served as outside counsel for Miss Swift for communications between Miss Swift's lawyer and Miss Lively's counsel. Because remember, there were the allegations that Bully Lively and her lawyer were threatening both Taylor Swift and her lawyer. Today's letter says the Wayfarer parties subsequently served a Rule 45 deposition and document subpoena on Miss Swift that sought documents and communications entirely duplicative and cumulative of those sought by the subpoenas 108, 109. After nearly 2 full weeks of tabloid coverage on the subpoenas, as well as the now stricken filing on a related topic, remember that one? The Wayfarer parties withdrew both subpoenas on May 22nd. The same day, an exclusive article co-authored by the Daily Mail's James Vitushka, whose relationship with the Wayfarer parties is already part of the record. Remember that name? The publicist Leslie Sloan was bickering with James Vitushka over what he remembered or didn't remember about sexual harassment and sexual assault. Well, James Vitushka wrote an article about the withdrawal of the Taylor Swift subpoenas, and according to today's motion, they say, already part of the record, the article, quote, quoted an insider stating the reason they dropped the subpoenas. Quote, Justin Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, dropped the request for the subpoena, and the reason for doing this is very simple. They got exactly what they were seeking. Sending a subpoena to Taylor and Taylor's response has provided Baldoni's team with everything that they needed. Taylor stated that she was not involved at all, and this is in stark contrast to what Lively has said. The insider continued, Taylor was always considered to be the smoking gun in this, and everyone is extremely pleased with the end results and the information it yielded. They got exactly what they were hoping for and much more. Well, this week, Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, who is also my lawyer and has not given me any information or swayed me or given me a discount for mentioning him so much, Brian Friedman talked about Taylor Swift to Megyn Kelly. Watch that video that I shared yesterday and get fully caught up. But now, Team Pinocchio's lawyer is bringing that up. In today's letter to the judge, they say, quote, on June 11th, 2025, during his 50-minute interview with Megyn Kelly, Mr. Friedman again recognized that he may not need that evidence related to Ms. Swift in addition to what he has already. If the Wayfarer parties have already obtained exactly what they were hoping for and much more, and do not need any evidence in addition to what they have obtained, then the subpoenas 108, 109, or the requests for production 108, 109 are duplicative, cumulative, and non-necessary. Even more, the only allegations in this action that were ever remotely relevant to Miss Swift were in the Wayfarer party's now dismissed complaint. Miss Swift is not mentioned a single time in Miss Lively's amended complaint. Delulu's lawyer also complains to the judge, saying, counsel for Miss Lively emailed counsel for the Wayfarer parties about the public statements interpreted to mean that, one, the intent of the Wayfarer parties' subpoena, since our understanding is that they obtained no discoverable materials as part of this process, was to introduce scandalous allegations about Miss Lively and her counsel into the public domain to generate negative stories. Or two, the Wayfarer parties have received materials responsive to their subpoena, which would come as a surprise given that no materials have been provided to us. The same email explained that any discovery that the Wayfarer parties or their counsel obtained concerning Miss Lively from any third party would be responsive to properly served RFPs, requests for production. To date, the Wayfarer parties have not responded to the email and have not produced any productions from Miss Swift. Further, the parties have an agreement to produce documents obtained via third-party subpoenas to each other promptly upon receipt, which would clearly apply to these documents, if any, notwithstanding the withdrawal of the subpoena. You know, I like to be fair. So far, everything is sounding sensical, logical. They sum things up in the last paragraph, telling the judge, either interpretation of the reason the Wayfarer parties withdrew the subpoenas warrants the entry of a protective order. If the Wayfarer parties received documents from Miss Swift such that they have exactly what they need, then the discovery sought is cumulative and duplicative and need not be produced again by Miss Lively. If, on the other hand, the Wayfarer parties were seeking only sensational headlines by serving the subpoenas rather than materials to support their claims and defenses, they are not entitled to the information sought in the requests for productions 108, 109. The purpose of civil discovery is to obtain information relevant to claims and defenses in court, not to prop up a public relations narrative outside of court. Boom. Respectfully submitted, Ezra Hudson. Now, the judge has been siding with Ezra and Mike Gottlieb, her lawyers, a lot, but I don't think in this instance it'll be a total win. Protective order? Okay, granted, but you've still got to produce. You got to hand over what they are seeking, the Baldoni parties want, because Taylor Swift is relevant. I would argue very relevant. And not just because I love using her for attention. We have a lot in common. Thoughts on everything? Let's discuss in the comments section.